mean, I would be really happy for them. It's not a threat. But I think the other thing that people don't understand is that culture is not about genetics, right? It's not about the way we look. I have cousins in Guadalajara, Mexico that are blonde and blue-eyed. If you took them to Sweden and Denmark, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart from the rest of the clan there. Culture is not about genetics. It's not about the way we look. You know, people freak out when I tell them that there was no such thing as Mexicanos before 1831. Because they're ignorant to their history. You know, what were Mexicanos before? They were Maya, Azteca, Huichol. Right? So culture is not about genetics. It's about the way that we look at things, the way we, the way we actually do things, the way we look at things. And if you consider yourself to be bicultural or multicultural, you're ahead of the game. I believe that the first future for everyone on the planet is going to be found in the crossroads of multiculturalism. It's just a matter of time. You know, I didn't think we were ever going to have a black president. I thought we would have a woman president before we ever had a black president in this country. I was completely shocked by that happening and wonderfully surprised. Multiculturalism can offer us more than just great food and languages. It can offer us unique perspectives, unique thoughts, and unique ideas. That's exactly what we're pursuing, right? You know, it's interesting to me, the word retirement. You know, we're dealing with all these words, and I think that our society is moving so rapidly that we're not keeping up with the transitioning of a lot of words in our society. For example, the word retirement, right? You guys realize that there's a lot of people now who are never going to be able to retire. They're not. There's a new book that I bought, Average is Over, by this economist, and he's talking about how the middle class people are going to actually have to look for happiness in a cheaper method. They're going to have to look for cheaper happiness. And I thought to myself, well, this guy hasn't been to the Imperial Valley or Mexicali, right? You know, people have been dealing with cheaper happinesses and realities for a long time. He's obviously not that intelligent or not that wise, as far as I'm concerned, right? The interesting thing about multiculturalism, you know, is that obviously it's going to be inevitable that we do acquire as many cultures as possible, and that we should not be afraid of that. But let me offer you some examples of what happens when the cultures collide. This is a baby or a doll that my mom found in a yard sale. She likes going to yard sales. She puts a diaper on this thing. This is part of her nativity scene. If you look at this thing, the baby is actually bigger than the cow. Oops, sorry. And it's also bigger than Mary and Joseph. This is actually a miracle birth, especially for those moms out there, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? But one of the things that used to happen to me as I was growing up, I also grew up as a migrant student. For those of you who don't know what a migrant student is, basically I grew up picking fruits and vegetables every summer. I was taken out of school about two weeks early. We came back about a month and a half late, depending on the crops that summer. I would come back with these beautiful purple hands that I kept in my pockets for most of the school year. I was completely, thoroughly depressed and embarrassed about those particular experiences that I had. We used to travel up and down the state of California, as far north as Oregon and Washington State. And in Washington State, we stayed in these labor camps that have been around since the 1950s. They had these, basically the roofs were tin. It was just a plywood between the other sections where other families stayed. And they had these old beds that had been around since the 1950s. And my father, he was pretty brutal at times, and he worked at sometimes 10, 12, 15 hours. 7 days a week sometimes. Sometimes we came home, all we wanted to do was just sleep. We would get up, not even take a shower. You know, after sleeping on these mattresses for 2 or 3 days, our heads would get full of lice. Muchos piojos. I could feel them at night having their little parties up there. It would keep me awake. And because my father was a very proud man, instead of taking us to the local health clinic to get our embarrassing problem taken care of, he went to the store, Fred Meyer. He came back with a giant can of this stuff. And if you don't know what this is, basically it's poison. And what my father would do is he would basically line us up in a military stance, and he would begin to systematically spray our heads until they formed little rivers that cascaded down our ears and eventually down our backs. And I would see my sisters in front of me crying hysterically about losing their hair and losing their boyfriends or some ridiculous thing like that. But I remember standing in line, having three very distinct thoughts. Number one, I wanted to kill my dad for doing this to us. Because I was aware of the fact that there was a lot of people here in America that took better care of their dogs sometimes than their own, than the way my father was treating us. The second thought was that I wanted to beat up everybody that came out to kind of make fun of this crazy thing that was happening out in front of everybody to see. But the third thought that stayed with me for many years was that that particular experience, and many experiences just like that, was beginning to dictate my value and my future. And I think that most of us as kids, I think that we have a tendency to kind of shut down our world, and kind of limit the capacity to be able to kind of see beyond the here and now. And I think if somebody would have time traveled back to that point in time where I was being sprayed with this stuff, and if you were to tell me that, I would become a motivational speaker, an author, an artist and creative person, I would probably say that you were probably satanic or Satan himself, right? What's going to determine your future and what's going to determine your value is not where you start, but basically what you do with your life and the effort that you put into it. People think I'm crazy because I've been doing what I'm going to do next, but I'm going to promise you guys that if you put in 110% in everything that you do, not just 90% or 99%, but 110%, above and beyond the Call of Duty, I will guarantee you guys that magic is going to happen in your life. I'm not saying you're going to be rich and famous. That I cannot promise you, and I will not promise you that. But I'm talking about the real magic. I'm talking about places you're going to go, people you're going to meet, things that you're going to eat. Of course, that's really important to me, actually. Magical. Just sheer magic, guys. I can promise you that. 110%. It'll get you that. I will promise you that. But one of the things that we need to do, obviously, before we get there, we need to actually springboard a campaign to get some scholarships from this particular company called VIX, right? For Latinos, we use this as a miracle drug for everything and anything under the sun, right? Broken bones, fevers, birth control. We use it for pretty much everything, right? We keep this company in business. I came across this quote by U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan. He said that almost 40% of our Black and Hispanic students fail to graduate high school on time. I was sick to my stomach when I read this particular quote. Unfortunately, I believe that the majority of our students today are ignorant about their amazing abilities and their amazing creativity. I believe that we're creating generations of great test takers, making sure they have the right answer all the time. And we're creating a situation where all of our students are incredibly scared of being wrong. We need to make sure that all of our students feel comfortable being wrong, sometimes in the process of learning and inventing something original and different. I say this because if we look at history and we look at what's made this country great, which has been its entrepreneurship, its inventiveness, and creativity, I believe that anyone who's ever created something original and different didn't have the answer the first time or maybe the 500th time. And as I travel around the country, I continue to find students as young as second grade that are full of fear, full of doubt of their abilities and their intelligence, and are shutting down creatively. They're just waiting for the teacher to give them the answer. And if you multiply this fear and self-doubt by 10 years, you know what's going to happen? What's happening all over the country? Latinos dropping out, blacks dropping out like flies. It's just fear and self-doubt. But the real question is this, guys. Why should we care about whether or not 40% of Latino black students graduate high school on time or even graduate at all? I'm going to answer a question with a question. I know you're not supposed to do that. I remember my teacher saying, you can't answer a question with a question. But here's the thing. I'm going to do it anyways. Because the question is, we should care because is it possible that one of the students that dropped out of school that dropped out of school last year, or that will be dropping out of school this year, or that dropped out 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 15 or 20 years ago, is it possible that one of those students that dropped out already from our education system ripped us off and took with them the answer to cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and some of our social and economic problems? And the answer is yes. Yes. Absolutely yes. And that's the scariest and the saddest thing about this whole thing, guys, because in other words, I believe that if we continue not to care about what happens to all of our students, we will all suffer the consequences. We need to look at every student as having the same value and same potential as any other person in the world, regardless of their culture and regardless of their upbringing. For this reason and this reason alone, as students, we have a vested interest in your success. You know, you guys might have one of these answers and you guys don't even know it yet. So I'm glad that at least you've given yourself the opportunity to move forward with this whole thing. Now, I haven't always been this intelligent and this creative, I guess, in some ways. This is a photograph of me when I was in 2nd grade. I had really bad teeth. I didn't even know what a toothbrush was. My first toothbrush was actually given to me by my school nurse, along with these red pills that I would put in my mouth, and it would show me where I needed to brush more. That was so cool, wasn't that? Remember that? Love that. But again, I also grew up as a migrant student. I was born in Mexicali, Mexico in 1961. I came to the United States when I was a year and a half. I was the last one of the clan to be born in Mexicali in Mexico. I came here when I was a baby. We actually ended up in Holtville, and there was 13 of us living in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. Sometimes there was 2 or 3 people in the bathroom at one time. I won't tell you what was going on, but it wasn't pretty. Right? I didn't have my own room. I didn't have my own bed. I actually slept with 2 or 3 other brothers. Y luego uno se meaba la noche, and I had to run out to find drier ground. I guess during the wintertime it was kind of cool because it was kind of like a heater, right? But then it got cold after a while. Here I am again picking green beans with my brothers. The worst job I ever did, hands down, because it was so humid and hot. Most of the time we just kind of took our shoes off. It was horrible. And here I am picking strawberries with my mother. Nothing was ever expected from any of my brothers and sisters. And when I mean nothing, when I say nothing, I mean nothing. Most of my brothers and sisters were actually pulled out when they were junior high and high school. And the same thing was going to happen to me. Obviously, I didn't want to work on the fields for the rest of my life. So I decided that I wanted to go to college. A few months ago, there was an interesting question that was asked at a university that I was at. They asked me if Simon Silva, as a young kid, processed information the same way that I process information today as an adult. I had to think about that for a while, and I came to the conclusion that, I actually did. And again, the only difference between me and a student, a young student, regardless of age, is the fact that I've given myself a platform through my art, through my writing, through my speaking. I've given myself a platform to be able to show the world what's going on inside my head. I've developed and given myself the communication skills to be able to interpret as accurately as possible what's going on in your head. Don't underestimate what's going on in your kid's head. Even if they are a kindergartner or first grader, or as a teacher, even if they're a 3rd grader. There's all this beautiful, intense, incredible stuff that's going on in your kids' heads. We just need to nurture those communication skills to be able to bring that out. And I think that's one of the biggest assets of the arts, is to be able to bring that out. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. I wanted to go to college. There was one major obstacle. His name was my father. My father hit, he yelled, he screamed. He never really spoke to us. So there was no way in the world that I was going to ask him for permission to let me go to college, so I did the next best thing that any macho guy could have done. Left all my dirty work for my mother to do. Her job was to convince my dad to let me go to college, and she failed miserably, because my father responded by, number one, trying to kick me out of the house, try to beat me up, and he called me a whole bunch of bad words, both in English, Spanish, and I think it was Chinese, because every time he got drunk, he became completely trilingual. It's kind of a beautiful thing. He was working on his German with some tequila shots, I believe. But as students, I hope you have at least one parent that actually cares about what happens to you and your happiness. I had my mother. My mother actually took it upon herself to give me what I wanted. And she got together with my 2 aunts, my tia Maria and my tia Brigita from Brawley. Actually, Brawley, I think is how you pronounce it. They got together, they formed their own little wise woman club. You can call it a gang, because they were going to jump my dad and force him to change his mind about letting me go to college. And they did. My father responded by letting me go to college and actually stay in the house. I decided to come to IVC by default because I was, again, financially challenged, meaning I was dirt poor. I decided to major in art, not because I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life, but I just sort of felt that it gave me the best chances of success. I love psychology, I love biology, Somebody reminded me of Jeff Coate, which was one of the professors here at IVC that I absolutely adored because I loved her classes. She was wonderful. But I didn't know what this thing education was about. I didn't know what it was going to offer me. You know, what was going to take place. So I decided to become an art major. And I came to IVC for 2 years. For those of you who are here at IVC by default or by choice, all I can say is that you've made a good choice. I think the community colleges, for what you get for your money, I think it's a great value. And I think the new goal for you as students is to get your degree with having the least amount of debt possible. If you decide to go into education, become a teacher, and you end up going to USC, UCLA, or UCSD, or San Diego State, and you end up owing $80,000 after you're done, you don't want to start off in the hole, guys. It's like shopping, right? I hate shopping, but on occasion I do it because I have to. I go to the sale racks because I just can't bring myself to pay $60 or $80 for a shirt. Get the same shirt on sale for like, 15 bucks. Ladies understand that. I still haven't grasped the whole concept, but it's somewhere in there. But again, this is a wonderful place to be for 2 years, maybe 3, I don't know, maybe not longer than that. Eventually, I transferred to the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California. And no, this is not Richard Ramirez, the serial killer. This is actually Simon Silva before gel was invented. I'll tell you a funny story. My dad, I didn't share this with the other crowd, so you're privileged that I'm giving you some extra information here. My dad used to take us over to Mexicali to get haircuts. And they used to give you 2 options. Líneas claras or líneas oscuras. In other words, do you want to see skin or do you want to leave it a little darker there, a little longer? Well, my dad always wanted, more bang for his buck, so for 50 cents, I think at the time it was. And so he asked those líneas claras, give them a buzz, man, all of them. And then what he would do is he would park in front of this ghetto bar in the middle of somewhere in Mexicali, and we wouldn't see him till about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And, all 7 of the boys would be in this brown bomber station wagon, just beating the crap out of each other, waiting for something to happen. We didn't know we were. We had no money, no cell phones. So at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, my dad would come out of this bar with some potato chips and some Cokes, just kind of like scrambling his way, almost falling with this stuff, with a trio behind him, playing some crazy songs. That was the reality, right? So I swore that I was going to have long hair as soon as I got out of my house. But then it got better. Then my dad said, well, forget you guys. You guys are complaining about, staying in the van for too long. So she bought my sister, Elvira, her own haircutting kit. She never practiced before, so if we were getting bad haircuts before, we got even worse afterwards. And I would just cry, just so miserable. Then I swore that as soon as I got out of my house, I was going to have long hair. I tried it, lasted for a couple months, and I've had short hair ever since. Funny how those things work, right? I went to the Art Center. For the first 2 or 3 months, I cried, I screamed, I yelled. I was terrified coming from Hopeville to Pasadena, which is basically LA. I was there for 5 years. Basically, it's a 2.5-year program. I graduated in 1986 with a bachelor's degree in illustration. I gave my parents 6 months' notice of my graduation, thinking that 6 months for Latinos was enough time to prepare. I had parties in my house, and I invite my white friends, and I tell them that the party starts at 6. They get there at 5:30 with a bottle of wine. My Latino friends, I tell them the party starts at 12, and they get there at 6:30 with no wine. So funny how that works, right? Unfortunately, my graduation came and went, and unfortunately, my parents did not show up. And that was pretty devastating, because I knew at that point that I was pretty much on my own. But unfortunately, I came to the conclusion that my parents just didn't care. And obviously that was the wrong perspective, because now I realize that the real reason why my parents didn't show up to my graduation was simply because they were afraid and they were embarrassed. Why? Because they probably didn't have the right social skills, the right clothes, the right car, the right amount of money, the right name, the right skin color. They were afraid and they were terrified to go to this place where they felt out of place. So guys, if it happens to you, you won't be the first one, okay? And maybe we need to cut our parents some slack. But then something happened. I realized that, it wasn't about the money, it wasn't about the fame and fortune. I realized that even though I had graduated, and the sad part about this whole thing, guys, is that, nobody expected anything from me. I think that was the sad part. And I think that if I would have dropped out of school and gotten one girl pregnant, two girls pregnant, beaten my dog, drank every day of the week, I think my parents would have not thought a single weird thing about it. Because I think that that's what really was expected, or it was just the norm in some cases. So there was never really anything expected from me at that point. But then something wonderful happened. I was introduced to a thing called books. I think now they come in iPads, right? I was introduced to this thing called books that I had never really looked at. My house, I grew up without books and art. On occasion, we would have a copy of a alarma, when there was toad babies being born in Mexicali or something like that. You guys remember La Alarma? It's kind of like the Mexican version of the National Enquirer, but more bloody and crazy. It was really, really nuts. And so I was introduced to this thing called books, and I gave myself the opportunity to see myself from a different perspective. Let me tell you how it worked, guys. Because a lot of people are kind of confused as to how books really function. Anybody here a fan of the show called Hoarders? Hoarders? I'm a big fan of Hoarders, okay? I'm an addict of that program, and I'll tell you why. Because I love psychology. I love the way people think, or try to figure out the way people think. And if you've ever seen that show, these are people that hoard all kinds of stuff, animals, just junk. They can't get out of the house. They have to, get out from the top story, second floor, third floor, whatever it is. And they don't see anything wrong with their situation. They don't have an issue. They don't have a problem. And it's not until there's intervention and some family member comes to them and says, hey, you have an issue, you have a problem, you need to realize that you can't have 3 feet of diapers inside your house. The way it works is this way. Somebody introduced me to some books. I identified with some characters in the books, and I was able to see my life from the perspective of these characters. Sometimes we can't see our personal problems and issues until we see it from a different perspective, and that's basically how it works. Or at least that's the way it worked for me. So I began this wonderful education that basically changed my form of thinking, my perception, my learning. It was just beautiful, sheer inspiration. I wanted to know who I was. I wanted to know where I came from, what I was about, what I was interested in, how I viewed the world, what my perspective was. And it boiled down to the fact that the arts and the creative freedom that they possess gave me that opportunity to look at my life in a different perspective, through a different lens, so to speak. The thing that was in the way, the biggest obstacle in the way I viewed myself, my life, my self-worth, and my future, was this ugly word called perception. Unfortunately, the way that we perceive people in our society today, who's important, who's not important, is broken. We look at people like these guys. And I had Tiger Woods before he did Tiger Woods, by the way. Oh, and by the way, George Lopez did a Tiger Woods times 10. Look into that, you'd be surprised. Maybe he's not a good role model for us anyways. And by the way, he stole his wife's kidney, right? And then he divorced her. That guy should be put in jail. That's just my opinion, okay? That's just my opinion. And we can talk about that on another occasion if you don't like that. But obviously, we become a society. And this is really the sad part. We become a society that is more interested in knowing about celebrities and sports figures than a society that wants to know more about themselves. That's a problem, guys. That's a big problem. We've underemphasized the importance of the people that have had an impact on history, on our lives, and that are truly worthy of our respect and admiration. In California, it's a requirement to teach about Cesar Chavez. Do you guys realize that I've come across teachers in other states that don't even know who Cesar Chavez is anymore? Pretty alarming. It really is. I'll take it a step further and say that we've become a society that's more interested in trivial information than deep thought and conversation. Dr. Seuss was afraid of kids. Okay, that's interesting, but where do we go with that? What does that offer us? Unfortunately, we need to appreciate and respect those individuals who realistically have changed their lives and that are truly worthy of respect and admiration. And if we don't address this issue, we risk the possibilities that we might find ourselves trapped in an unrealistic world, unable and not willing to deal with the real issues. I recently read a quote that said we should be afraid of the new slavery, the slavery of the minds and souls of men. Let me share a little bit of two people that helped me wake up to the more balanced perspective of what life should be all about. Two of the people that taught me some of my life's greatest lessons and who for many years I considered to be somewhat worthless. And these two people were actually my parents. This is a photograph of my mother. No, I did not give her this orange stain, whatever it is. That's bright. I almost have to wear sunglasses. But here she is with her favorite toy, her baby, life-size baby. One of the interesting things about my mother is that my mother showed me how to be a giving person. My mother has given everything away. Birds, animals, clothes, jewelry, you name it, she's given it away. But the interesting thing about my mother is that even today, if she was here and she had some gold and you kind of commented on her jewelry, she would take it off and give it to you without even knowing who you are. So I have to ask the question, guys. Do we need more rich people, more famous people, or simply do we need, in these times in our society, do we need just plain and simple more people like my mother and your mother, who maybe is willing to give it all without requirement of coming out of the newspaper or the magazine, who are willing to give it all, not for fame and fortune, but just because it's the right thing to do? Let me tell you something about my dad. Here's my dad, one of his favorite roosters. I hated these things. He had about 300 or 400 of them when we were growing up. I hated them because he actually treated these things better than his own kids most of the time. He gave them a special diet. He exercised them, fed them correctly. He loved these things. I wanted to give him some Kool-Aid with some stuff in it, right? Unfortunately, obviously, that would have been just as cruel as to what he was doing with these guys. But the interesting thing about my father is that my father was also an irrigator. And he used to irrigate all over the valley, but a lot of times he found himself down by Calexico. And it was quite often that I would come to the house after school, and I would find myself with 6, 8, 12 different people in our house. We had a big red barn in the back of the house. Had no idea who they were, and so I just assumed that they were relatives, lost relatives from Mexico that I had never met. So I'd ask my mother, who are these guys? And my mother would say, pues ya conoces a tu padre. You know your dad. My dad had this interesting, good habit of picking up people along the border in the fields that were scared, that were hungry, that were tired, and he would pick them up, bring them to the house, give them an opportunity to eat, to rest, to take a bath, and in the evening he would take out his accordion and his guitar, and he would play this god-awful music, but it was free, so you couldn't complain. In the morning he would feed him breakfast, give him a ride 20, 30 miles down the road, and not once did he ever ask him for a single penny. So again, I have to ask the question, do we need more rich people? Do we need more educated people? Do we need whatever you want? Or do we simply need, in this time and age, do we need more people like my parents or your parents who are simply able to help without needing that limelight and that recognition? And simply they do it because, again, it's the right thing to do. Maybe the people that you need to be asking autographs for are actually in your own house, and you're not even aware of it. Perception, guys. Be very careful of perception, because it can change the way you think. It can change you forever, and you need to be very careful about that. The arts have been responsible for the variable experiences that provided me with a love for learning. And that's a very important thing, guys, because I believe that it's through the arts that we're going to be able to produce enhanced thinking when they are used and respected and used correctly. This is what I've learned after all these years, that if we limit our experiences, variable experiences, we're going to limit our education. If we limit our education, we're going to limit our personal growth. And if we limit our personal growth, we're going to limit our effectiveness as individuals or as professionals. Very important stuff. And why is this important, guys? this whole creativity thing, because in the not too distant future, only those individuals that enhance their creativity are going to remain both strong and competitive in the future workforce. 21st century skills will demand that all of you learn to make yourselves indispensable, and the only way to do this is to re-nurture the creativity in order to sharpen your problem-solving skills. And the only way to do this is to clearly understand what the arts are about. So this evening, what I want to do is I want to share with you and make clear as to what the arts are and what they're not. First of all, what they're not. Art isn't about being a hobby. Art isn't necessarily a hobby. I mean, it could be. Art isn't a filler course or a glorified babysitting class. I remember, being in school and you didn't have a class third period, so they would stick you with this disrespectful manner in the art class. It was a glorified babysitting class. No respect. And the teachers just kind of took it. And I've been speaking around the country at these different art conferences, and I'm going to do one in San Diego in March, the national conference. And, I'm basically telling these art teachers to man up, to woman up, right? Not only are they in the bottom of the totem pole as teachers, but also as art teachers. And they need to gain back the respect that they deserve. Art isn't an option for anyone's education. Art isn't necessarily about the final product or the painting. Art isn't just for a privileged few, and art isn't necessarily about abstraction. So what is art? Well, first of all, art is a way of life. I have to be very careful about what I expose myself to, especially at night, because I won't be able to sleep. I have to digest that and respond to it. Art is an experience. It's a journey. Art is a unique universal language. I get emails from people all over the world now because of the internet. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful tool. I don't have to explain to people what these paintings are about necessarily. And I hope that as human beings we evolve to the point where we can actually give people credit for the ability to be able to communicate through imagery. It has to be recognized in an entirely different language. Something that we obviously understood as kids even before we were able to speak. Art is about communication. Art is something that can take us to a place where we need to go. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you've ever sat down with a great novel, watched a great movie, listened to a great symphony, watched a great, beautiful painting, and after that experience, you felt much more complete, like you knew yourself a little bit better, or human nature a little bit better, that is something that only art can give us. Art is about problem solving. What do I mean by that? We want our kids to be better problem solvers, and yet we strip them from the one thing that can actually be taught correctly and given to them and nurture their ability to be better problem solvers. As a creative type, we respond to stimuli. We have this wonderful idea in our heads, and that becomes the problem, right? How do we get this wonderful experience, this wonderful vision out of our head and actually produce it so that we can offer it to another individual so they can have the same experience that we are having? Isn't that problem solving 101? You give the tools to the kid to be able to get all this stuff out of their head and be able to be better problem solvers. Art is about inspiration. Art is about answering questions. Art is something that can make us more human. Art is something that's a powerful thing, and I'll tell you why. One of the most powerful things about the arts is that the arts is the only thing that we have as a society that can make everyone in the world, regardless of race, color, gender, finances, the arts are the only thing that we have in our society to make everyone in the entire world incredibly important. Through a corrido, a song, a movie, a novel, a painting, everyone can become incredibly important. And only the arts can do that. Maybe that's one of the reasons why we dismantle the arts, so to speak, right? I'm just saying. Art is about respect. Now that confuses a lot of people. But let me tell you what I mean by that. When I paint something, when I say something, when I write something, or when you write something, or paint something, or say something, you should do it in a manner that you're actually asking for all the respect and all the time for the viewer, or the reader, or the listener. You should do the best job possible because you want people to respect your time and your ability and your talent and your creativity. Art is about respect. And you can apply that to pretty much everything, right? Whether you're playing sports or whether you're writing a paper, you got to make sure that you understand you take responsibility for the fat, juicy F if you didn't put very much effort into it. Art is about self-expression. Art is about making good decisions. How is it possible that we miss the fact that if a child is having fun, giggling and laughing and doing finger painting, and how is it possible that there's some sort of value in having fun and learning at the same time? I think that kind of confuses people. I think people think that learning has to be this kind of institutionalized kind of drudgery, right? I personally find learning to be dynamic and inspirational and motivational and interesting and, everything, all these great words, right? I don't find it boring. I get excited about learning new things, being introduced to new things. I think learning is wonderful. It's just fantastic. So when I talk about making good decisions, it is about making good decisions. When you sit in front of a piece of paper or a canvas, typewriter, you're making all these decisions about color and texture and lighting and composition. There's 1,000,001 decisions taking place. It really is about making good decisions. Art is about explaining the unexplainable. There comes a time where actually, again, the only thing that we understand or hidden brain understands is basically visual imagery. It doesn't understand language. Art is a way to develop our sense of purpose and our sense of direction. I would encourage each and every one of you, as students or individuals, to acknowledge and learn to use the power that exists in exposing yourself to a wide variety of artistic experiences. One thing that I know for sure is the effect that creativity, a love for learning, a sense of respect and compassion will have in all of your lives and your education. When we learn to understand and use these things effectively, by exposing yourself to a multitude of great creative, educational, and compassionate experiences, I will guarantee you that it will heal you, it will inspire you, and more importantly, it will most definitely change you forever. I leave you with this last thought. It was Saturday morning cartoons and sci-fi movies that inspired a generation of engineers that got us to the moon. We can teach as much math and science as you want, but we're only going to be halfway there, guys. And unless we want to become a third world country ourselves, which I would prefer not to, it is incredibly important that we create a new generation of creative individuals that take us to that place where we want to be. As a nation, as a country, as a state, as a county. I'm excited about the possibilities of what would happen if we create new generations of creative individuals that take us. And how many of our social and economic problems can we resolve through these new creative generations? Your abilities, the intelligence and the creativity that you have is there. You need to re-nurture it, bring it back to life. I want you as students, as individuals, to help us find out, where else can we go? What else can we do? I would like to thank you again for giving me this wonderful opportunity to come back to IVC, come back to the Valley and share these ideas and thoughts. I would like to now leave it open to some questions. I know I went a little longer than I expected, but I wanted to make sure that I was thorough about my presentation. Any questions, comments, money you want to give me? That's cool too. Anybody? Yes?
You say you no longer are you no longer paint?
No, that's not what I said. I said I'm no longer an artist. By the definition, because I think that when I tell, well, let me just throw this out at you. When someone says, when you hear the word artist, for example, today I was kind of disappointed that in the newspaper they said that I was a Chicano artist. I think that there was a point in time where I identified myself as a Chicano artist, but I think the culture also has limitations on people's education. And what I mean by that is that, I think that the fact that when I was growing up, my parents, all of their friends, basically 99.9% of them were other Latinos or Mexicanos. They were talking about the same thing, listening to the same thing, arguing about the same thing, fighting about the same thing. There was never any kind of change. There was no variable experiences in my life. And not to say that, the Mexican culture, the Latino culture has nothing to offer. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful, great things about that culture. But if you just hang out with the same people over and over and over and over again, what are the possibilities of your variable experiences, happening in your life? I would prefer to talk to other cultures, people that don't look like me, that act like me, to find out how they view the world. How can I learn from them? And so when I throw out the word artist, I think that it's no longer sufficient to explain to people what we're really talking about here. People, when I use the word artist, I think they think that I pee in a jar and put a crucifix in there just for, just to shock people, right? And there are those kinds of artists. But I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I think that we have to logically come to the conclusion. Who was the guy that taught philosophy here? Mr. Ham? Remember that guy? He was Han? Yeah, he was a little crazy. But he was great. I loved him. But, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the fact is that not all doctors are good. Not all attorneys are good. Not all teachers are good. Not all artists are good. If you're encountering art that scares the hell out of you or that confuses you, then I would stay away from that. My job is not to confuse you or scare you. And so I think that when I call myself, and I decided to call myself a creative problem solver, people are intrigued by that. I think it offers more of an opportunity for dialogue, because once I tell them I'm an artist and they don't know what my artwork looks like or what it is, their intent and their stereotype is to kind of stereotype me and box me, because I'm sure that some of you that are here this evening probably thought I was going to do some sort of crazy art thing, right? And I just wish they would have said just artist or creative problem solver or something, or that they would have spoke to me before they actually wrote the article. Because I think there would have been more people actually not put away by that kind of terminology. And again, I think the word art and artist is one of those types of terminology, the words that I explained to you before, like gambling and gaming and drugs and recreational drugs. Prostitutes are now escorts. I mean, even prostitutes have a better name than artists do. Why can't artists have a better evolved name, recognition? So that's one of the reasons why, I'm not saying that I don't paint anymore. I actually am involved in a lot of other stuff. I actually finished this book this week called Cultivate a Creative Mind, which is basically a lot of the theory that I'm presenting here is in this book, which will be coming out in January, I'm hoping. But again, why am I going to box myself into limiting myself as a creative person and say that all I'm good for is to paint? I'm not, and I'm not happy with that. I want to evolve and change, as I, with what I input into my brain and what I come across. So no, I still paint. It's limited. I do mostly commission pieces for collectors, but I prefer. It's kind of like I moved my studio from a physical location into my brain now. That's where I live out of now. So, I love the idea of being able to create in many different forms, whether it's through words or paint or thoughts and ideas or a whole bunch of other stuff. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Yes.
When you reflect back on your life and your career, can you think of one just really dynamic, defining moment for you where it was just like, wow?
Yes, I can. We had a crazy lady in our high school. Her name was Esperanza Sendejas. She's now Dr. Sendejas. Her brother owns that store in, what is it, in Westmoreland or Nyland? What's it? Calapat. Well, this lady, she was ahead of her time, really. I mean, if you ever get a chance to meet her or speak to her, I mean, she's dynamic. Well, she was the high school counselor at Hopefield High School. And I came back from working, 3.5 months. I was extremely shy, hated talking to people, hated talking even to myself. And so I came back to school, and she said, I understand that you're a minor student. And I said, yes. And she says, well, would you like a job? And I said, I already have a job. I work every weekend, every summer. I mean, why do I need another job? She said, no, you need something else to keep you busy. I said, okay, whatever. So I walked out, and the next day she calls me into her office, and she got me a job with the Hopefield Tribune, the paper in Hopefield. And So then she started knowing me a little bit better, and this lady was nuts. I mean, this lady was ahead of her time. She would literally, every afternoon, go visit the home of every one of her students. And everybody in Hopeville thought that she was a metiche. She was like a meddler, meddling in other people's business. She had good intentions, and everybody just kind of rejected her kind of avant-garde kind of thinking and philosophy. Well, make a long story short, she decided that she was going to, well, she would do things like take us out of class and bring us to El Centro to do a puppet show. We had never practiced, you know, and so she put us in situations where we actually had to learn without any kind of preparation, which was great. She was fantastic, phenomenal. So she decided that she was going to throw me in to the deep end of the pool, and she said, I want you to draw something. I don't care what it is, whatever you want to draw. So I was traumatized with the fact that as we traveled up north, my dad would stop off at these rest stops, and we slept on the grass. And in the middle of the night, you know, people with these dogs would come over and sniff us out. You know, we were like these dead cocoons of the yard there. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, the sprinklers would come on, and my father had had enough of that kind of nonsense. So he decided to kind of basically do something very intelligent. He decided to basically park underneath the freeway overpass. I don't know if you've ever broken down underneath one of those things. Well, every time a car passes, it's like a jet. Well, multiply that by 10 when a big, huge semi passes by there. So instead of going to the rest stops to sleep, we actually pulled over to the side underneath this rest stop. And I was still traumatized by this incident, so I decided to do a little small drawing about this. And we had this brown bomber station wagon that we actually did. And so we all slept among the, the plants, and we slept on the, the pots and pans and the clothes. It was crazy. And to make things worse, my mom and my dad thought it was great to be able to buy some dumb animals in Washington State. So we actually came back from Washington State with these rabbits. My dad would go shopping for food at these pet stores, and we'd have these like Norwegian rabbits with these long ears. And we would just laugh because the attendant thought that my dad was actually buying as a pet, but he was buying food. And my mom would actually buy all these like plants. She's a big plant person. Anyway, so I drew this traumatic image, and I brought it to school. He says, well, I want you to meet me at such and such place because we're going to have a migrant family meeting, and we're going to present your drawing to the family there. So she puts me on stage. There's about 200 or 300 people there. She walks up. I walk up on stage with her, and she just leaves me there. She walks off. And you have to understand that I was completely shy, so I'm standing up there with this drawing, right? And I'm trying to hide my face. And they wanted me to explain what this whole drawing was about. And as I'm getting more nervous, getting ready to pass out and pass gas at the same time, this thing is covering my face, and they're screaming at me. We can't hear you. What is this about? And the more they scream, the more scared I get. So I'm like literally behind my drawing, right? Well, she waited till the very last moment, and she came up on stage, and she put her arm around me, and she said, I want to present to you guys Simon Silva. I want you guys to remember his name because he's going to be a famous artist someday. And I looked up at her, and I thought, she must be doing drugs. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. Maybe it's true. Maybe I can be a famous artist someday, right? I think that was the critical moment. And as teachers, if there's anyone here, teachers, you guys have really the most important job in the entire world. Aside from artists, that is, because you're just below us. Now, you can't imagine how important it is for you guys to be able to say something that inspirational to a child. So that was the deciding moment. That was really the thing that really did it for me. She believed. Even though I didn't, she believed, which was great. She still does, yeah. Anybody else? She's fantastic. Yes, see you in the back.
What would you say, what book has helped influence your success the most?
What has influenced my success the most? Oh, gosh. That's like asking me which is my favorite child, the middle one. No, just kidding. That's a tough one, I think most people assume that, you know, that my inspiration comes from, you know, from other two-dimensional artwork, you know, and unfortunately, you know, that's not true. I get my inspiration from movies, books, music, conversations, you know, people that I meet. You know, my philosophy is that, you know, we should all get to a point, or strive to get to a point in our lives where when somebody meets us, we leave an impact on that other person's life. And it doesn't have to be, you know, earth-shattering, guys. It could be a good recipe for a great enchilada. You know, I'll take that any day. Or it could be, you know, a quote. It could be a recommendation. You know, it could be something as simple as that. I would say that probably if I had to choose something, you know, I would say probably books. You know, because I think that books really open up a whole entirely different world for me. And again, if for those of you who don't like reading books, I just feel sorry for you guys because you guys are really missing out. Really missing out. I have about 20, 30 books by my nightstand. You can ask my wife. And I'm crazy enough to still buy more. I don't know why. But I'm really excited about reading those books. Yeah. So I would say books. Yes. Anybody else? Yes.
I was in the library yesterday and I saw your small town brownie book.
Mm-hmm.
So I was reading it, but so after you read it, you might have sent it back and forward.
Yes, that was traumatic. Oh gosh, yes. You know, and you know what's sad about the whole thing? And hopefully my wife is not listening, but I'm sure she is. The sad part about that whole situation was that I had been dating this girl that dumped me for a guy that had a car, or a nicer car, and I'm sure she regrets it. I gotta tell you who she is. But that I had been trying to like take her out on a date for all these 4 years of high school, and that night her brother said, "Hey, we're going dancing, and you know we're going to Mexicali at the Sheiks, or the Sheiks in Mexicali. We're going to go dancing. We want you to come with us." And you know, my sister's coming with us. I'm like, wow, great. And so before I left my graduation, my parents said, you know, we're going to give you 3 hours after your graduation, 2 or 3 hours, and we want you here. And I was just so angry because the story goes on to tell about the fact that it was blowing like crazy, like every graduation here in the Valley, I'm sure. And we actually ended up getting to thermal, right? And it's also associated with like heat, right? Thermal, there was a huge factory fire. And it was back in 1979. You guys are way too young to remember the fact that we're so stupid that we actually, you know, we actually had odd and even license plate numbers that were actually going out and getting gas because we had a gas shortage. And it's taken us, what, 35 years to actually get a decent, you know, MPG on a car? That's ridiculous, you know, by all intents and purposes. We should be flying with our cars. But maybe that's not a good idea, right? We can't even text and drive at the same time now. But eventually we had like three huge tanks of gas, and we were supposed to pass Highway 86 with all this. I mean, we went from California all the way to Washington State with these huge containers of gas, and the stench of gas for, you know, a day and a half. Yeah, that was pretty tragic. You got to read the book to kind of know what I'm talking about. Anybody else? Yes. I would say that you know, try to learn as much as you can about everything. You know, again, I think that, you know, pretty pictures are pretty pictures, but if people look at your artwork and they can't tell your artwork from anybody else's, then, you know, you need to strive to kind of find your own voice and what you want to do. I think that the other piece of advice I would offer you is to make sure that you contact as many artists to get their reality and their truth, because my truth might not be their truth and their reality. You know, check the sources. You know, don't believe everything I have to say because I might be lying to you. Who knows? I don't know. So make sure that you take that responsibility is your responsibility to find out if I'm telling you the truth, where my sources are coming from, and see what other people think about things. You know, this is just all of what I'm presenting here this evening is just my reality, my perspective, but it doesn't mean that that's the absolute truth. I mean, again, I'm ignorant to a lot of different things. I could be ignorant about some of the things that I said, and I'm open to that being proven wrong. You know? So that's what I would say. Yes.
I just want to thank you for being so inspiring. I came across your work 15 years ago when I was
you.
Reading IVC.
Uh-huh.
San Francisco State, but yeah, I didn't know you were from here. And reading your book, Small Town Brown, being a teacher now, I read your story and I identify with so much of it. And I didn't work in the field, just growing up.
Sure.
Put my CV in four.
Yeah.
And I see that in my students.
Mhm.
I see kids that look up at the kids next to them. And
Yeah.
have the good stuff, and have the right shoes, the right clothes. And, today when I, told them about you, I saw right in their eyes. So I know that you're moving towards, creative thinker and inspirational for teachers and those of us that work in that area. But
Yeah.
your paintings and your background is inspiring to us here.
Right. Well, thanks. Appreciate that. And I think that was the other defining moment too for me. When I first went out and made my first public appearance after the images came out, the fact that people were coming up to me and telling me all of this personal stuff about themselves and me not knowing who they are, and I'm thinking, wow, this is like taking an entirely different, life of its own. That was kind of inspirational as well. Did you see that? Somebody else? Yeah.
Besides your paintings, with all these brilliant colors, is there kind of like a hidden message that you
With
kind
the-
of portray?
With the colors?
No, just the whole painting itself. You got one that shows a field, another one that shows Caesar Chavez. Is there something you want to kind of give a story?
Well, I forgot to explain that some of those images are more commercial images because I did graduate as an illustrator, so I actually was doing a lot of work for things. I did a cover for Time magazine, I did some children's books, so not all of those images are quote unquote like fine art pieces. So I have to distinguish that, number one. Is there an overall arcing message? Yeah, I think the overall message is that I took it upon myself to basically try to speak for, and give recognition to people that haven't received the recognition and the honor that they deserve. Field workers, stay-home moms. I mean, who cares about stay-home moms, right? So yeah, the message is quite clear. I mean, that I felt that they were important, and I wanted to make sure that they understood when they see these images that somebody is thinking about them, and that I think they're important enough to create these images about them. So yeah, the message is quite clear. I think for me, at least, that's what my intention was. Yeah. Anybody else? I mean, hopefully, you didn't. Hopefully, I gave you what you expected. I think that creativity for me in the book, I basically quoted myself saying that. For me, creativity is encountering the unexpected. When you look at something, earlier when I worked with a group of students, I said that I know something is tremendously creative and really good when it pisses me off that I'm not the one that created that. That's how I know something is really good, when it just angers me and I get jealous that it's not me that came up with that idea. That's how I know something is really good, at least in my perspective. Anybody else? But again, I think part of my whole point of coming out and doing these presentations is, again, to make sure that people understand that, that part of the benefit, the overarching benefit of the arts wasn't the fact that I know how to draw and paint. That's not it, guys. Yeah, they might pay me a lot of money for the paintings, but ultimately the biggest benefit for all of this stuff, all of the stuff that I've encountered really was the arts. Talking about the books and the movies and music. Those are the things that really set me on the right path of becoming a lifelong learner. And that's really what we want all of our kids to be, right? We want them to be lifelong learners. And I've been doing this workshop that I did with a group of students today from 3 to 5. And the whole point was to get them, again, to cultivate, the creative mind, to get them back to being individuals and having their own opinion. Part of the philosophy of that is, if we think back when we were kids, or for those of you who are moms or fathers that have kids, young kids, if you ask them to draw something, they're not going to hesitate. If they're still intact creatively, they're not going to hesitate. They know exactly, let's say you ask them to draw a rat, right? They know what kind of rat they're going to draw. There's no hesitation. But as adults, all of a sudden we start caring about what other people think about our rat that we're going to draw, that we were going to try and draw the rat that they expect us to draw. See? And so there's a lack of individualism there. There's a lack of individuality and a lack of creativity. So when we actually go back to the basics. And what I tell my students, okay, you know, right, okay, you're afraid to draw a rat, but I think the reason why you're afraid is because you have no idea what kind of rat you want to draw. I mean, is it a fat rat? Is it a skinny rat? Is it a hairy rat? Is it a brown rat? Is it a black rat? What kind of a rat is it, right? So once you start asking all these questions, you know, you get back to the basics and you get them back into the right track, because once you have established a direction, then at least you know what direction you're going to, but it creates more confidence in the individual. So again, it goes back to communication. You know, the benefits that I've acquired from being involved in all this stuff has been that it's made me a better communicator. And that's what we